Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Timothy Harfield, Product Marketing Manager for Sage 100 Cloud in the US. Thank you for joining us for this crucial conversation about digital transformation. Now, as a term, digital transformation is really new. Although it's been used occasionally since the beginning of the 1960s, it really wasn't until around 2011 that the term digital transformation became a thing that people and businesses really started talking about. But what does digital transformation actually mean? And more importantly, what does digital transformation actually mean for you and for your business? That's what we're here to talk about today. So before we begin, just a couple of reminders and housekeeping items. So first of all, and next slide. Although we'll not pause for questions during the presentation, we will leave time for questions at the end. So please type your questions as we go, and we look forward to discussing them a little bit later. Secondly, if you're not able to stay through to the end of this webinar, or you'd like to review or share content from it later, don't fret. We're going to send out a link so that you can watch it asynchronously. Are we having some technical difficulties?
We are.
Do our digitals need transformation?
Yeah.
So as we're figuring out the technical stuff, let's go into some introductions. So who are we and why should you care about what we have to say? So as I mentioned at the outset, my name is Timothy Harfield. I run product marketing for Sage 100 Cloud in the US. Prior to joining Sage, I worked variously in educational technology as a data scientist and as a professor. In 2017, I published a book called The Occasions of Community, Jean-Baptiste Vico and the Concept of Society. By the way, I think it's a book that everyone should own and no one should likely read. But in it, I describe, among other things, how changes in information technology have radically and historically changed how we think about ourselves and our place in the social world. Today, I'm also really delighted to be joined by Laurie McCabe, co-founder and partner at SMB Group, a technology industry research and analyst firm founded in 2010 and focused exclusively on the small and medium business market and how SMBs can use technology to achieve significant business outcomes. Thank you for joining me today, Laurie.
My pleasure, Timothy.
So today we're going to talk about three main topics. So first of all, we're going to talk about what digital transformation is. Again, it's used very commonly, but very rarely is it well defined. So we're going to go into that. We're going to talk about what digital transformation means for small and medium-sized businesses in particular. And then we're going to provide some specific tips for businesses to help them on their digital transformation journey. And for that, I'm delighted that Laurie is here. Our goal today is not so much to shed light on the concept of digital transformation, something that is much hyped and poorly understood, but also to provide you with some practical advice that you can begin to implement at your business starting today. So let's jump right into things, shall we? Tell us, Laurie, what is digital transformation?
Yeah, well, thanks, Timothy. You know, there's lots of definitions out there, which I think makes things a little confusing, but I think the one we use at SMB Group is a pretty good one. And what we describe digital transformation as is how businesses use digital technologies to create new or to modify their existing business processes or practices, models, culture, and customer experience to meet the changing needs of their business and what the market requires. So simply put, it's really about identifying how your business needs to adapt to compete successfully in the digital age. But if you're coming into this kind of cold, you know, and you don't really understand it, you're not alone. We recently wrapped up a survey on digital transformation, and we asked small and medium business decision makers if they've heard of it and if they knew what it meant. And as you can see, almost half of SMBs don't know what it means or don't think they know what it means. But as the chart also shows, SMBs are getting more familiar with this term. We did this same question in a survey 2 years ago, and only about a third of the respondents then felt they knew what digital transformation is. And now, as you can see, that's up to about 57%. So that it's easy to think of it as a buzzword, but I think it is becoming more of a part of the way we talk about what's going on in the business environment. You know, it's not on the slide here, but we also asked our respondents, you know, for their free-form answers. What is, you know, in their own words, what does it mean? And we got a lot of interesting but also spot-on kinds of responses, like using technology to stay ahead of our customers and our competitors, and changing from physical to digital systems, and changing how we do everything so that customers can do business with us more easily. So we got a lot of good definitions, which says to me that a lot of these respondents are really starting to understand what this is. Next slide, please. So, you know, the question is, once you kind of understand what this term means, what's behind it? What's driving it? And I think, you know, the bottom line is that we're in the midst of the latest big transformative change in society, really, not just in business. In fact, Professor Klaus Schwab, who's the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, says that we're at the beginning, we're only just at the beginning of a revolution that's really changing the way we live and work and relate to each other. And he's written a book about this called The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which you'll see on the right hand of the chart. So basically, over the last 300 years, you know, there's been lots of innovation and change, from steam to electricity to computing, that have really turned everything upside down, fueled innovation, and reshaped industries. And in every one of these big changes, any business that you know, ignored the change, said, oh, I don't really have to change the way I'm doing anything, they really did so at their own peril, and in a lot of cases may have ended up, you know, losing their businesses. So today, in this fourth industrial revolution, what we see is companies using technology and information to really blur the lines between the physical and digital worlds. And in a lot of cases, creating incredible new products and services that disrupt business as usual. I mean, think about it. The internet is in our pockets. It's been in our pockets for a while now. And that's shifted because we can just look up and get any kind of information anywhere, anytime. It's really shifted the pendulum of power from sellers to buyers, right? No longer can marketers just market to us with a bullhorn. We can go and we can place all our comments and thoughts all over social media. So the internet and our easy access to it has really changed this dynamic between businesses and their customers into much more of a two-way street. And we can see examples of how tech is reshaping everything every day. You know, we've got things like predictive recommendation engines on Amazon, and voice assistants, autonomous cars, they kind of scare me. Facebook's facial recognition, which also kind of scares me, but I do use it to tag photos. So all of these technologies are really coming together to change what customers expect. And that means the bar for businesses gets raised. Customers want you as a brand to provide a more personalized, efficient, and consistent experience. And that goes for B2B and B2C customers. And if they don't get what they want, tech makes it easy to just find another supplier and take the business elsewhere. So the bottom line, you know, we're in the midst of this big change, and technology is really providing a way that you can build a better mousetrap and do business differently so that your business can survive and thrive. Timothy?
And that's such an important observation, right? That and an observation that Schwab actually makes when he's talking about the fourth industrial revolution, the changes that we saw occur from a technology perspective during the third revolution have fundamentally changed customer and consumer expectations. And it's as a function of those changed and changing set of expectations that businesses now need to adapt. So think about on the customer side or on the consumer side of the market, for example, Blockbuster. So Blockbuster Video was founded in 1985, and at that time, arguably one of the most iconic brands in the video rental space. I'm sure that there are many of the younger generation, right, that would not recognize a Blockbuster, but there was one on every corner as I was growing up, right? At its peak in 2004, Blockbuster employed nearly 85,000 people worldwide and had almost 10,000 stores, but it wasn't able to transition to a digital model, and so filed for bankruptcy in 2010. So what happened? So actually in 2000, Netflix approached Blockbuster with an offer to sell their company for about $50 million. At that time, Blockbuster's CEO was not interested in the offer because he thought it was a very small niche business and it was losing money at the time. So what went wrong? What went wrong with, well, what's the definition of insanity? Assuming that you can do the same thing over and over and over again and expect different results. What Blockbuster didn't recognize was that customer expectations and customer behavior was changing. And it was evolving in a way that was out of step with the business model of Blockbuster. And by the time Blockbuster recognized what was happening, the landscape had changed, and it was too late for them to adapt. So it lacked the agility necessary to keep step, and as a result, its last store closed. And this was big news, right? Its very last store closed just in the last 12 months. So as consumers, we increasingly expect the kind of service that we're getting through Amazon, right? We're used to mobile first experiences and a level of personalization that until now was just really impossible to scale. And these expectations are moving from the consumer world into the business world, right? It's not just Netflix and Amazon, right? It's now moving into the business world. Increasingly, businesses that interact with businesses in the way that we used to interact with businesses are thought of as quaint, archaic, and prone to disruption. More than that, we're seeing a growing digital divide. And this is really hard, right? As large manufacturers and distributors are able to scale and capture more of the market as a result of the investments that they're able to make, large capital investments into data and automation. Now, there are definitely cost-effective ways for small businesses to start leveraging the same technologies, but many are either unaware of their options or they're so overwhelmed and put their head in the sand. And we know that the implications of putting your head in the sand are dire.
Yeah, I mean, that the bottom line here is really that, if you can harness technology, and a lot of that comes down to using technology to get the data you need to see what's going on in your business and in the market, you can get some really big advantages over companies that don't. So, for instance, when you can really see what's happening in the business and with your customers and in your pipeline, it makes it easier to just streamline operations and better engage with them, number one, but also to spot trends and act more quickly on them or identify potential problems, right? And we all have this huge example of Amazon that gets this whole digital transformation story. Its whole business model is really based on using data to disrupt entire industries, from books to, now AWS with web services and cloud services, and who knows what else they're going to do next. There are so many different businesses now. But basically, regardless of the business they're trying to disrupt, they're using technology and data to give their buyers more convenience, lower prices, better fulfillment, and and or a better selection, right? So they're not really trying to meet customer expectations. They're really trying to reset them and disrupt people that have been around for a while. And they've done a pretty good job. I'm sure Barnes and Noble would attest, and I think a lot of tech companies that would like to beat Amazon out in web hosting would attest to the same thing. So this thing, though, it's not confined to Amazon. You know, we see it. We have some examples up here happening everywhere in every industry, and even some that you might not expect, right, Timothy?
Absolutely. So when I worked in higher education, we were working to develop some pretty sophisticated, I think, predictive models to identify students at risk of dropping out. So this is the use of data. So we could intervene and keep them on track for graduation. Doing this, we could sometimes see as much as a 3% sort of increase in student retention, but even just a 1% increase could yield millions of additional tuition dollars while also meeting the needs of the US market for skilled labor. But what we found is working with universities, you didn't need necessarily data scientists to make a significant impact. In higher education, simply increasing visibility into the student journey through data warehousing and simple reporting could see increased retention rates of upward of 10%. The predictive stuff was really fun and added, for sure, incremental value, but schools that jumped straight to the fancy stuff were never as successful as schools that started with getting their data in one place and thinking through their reporting needs before moving to predictive. And we see this in our Sage 100 cloud customers as well. So Import Logistics, for example, manages warehouses for more than 70 clients. With that many operations, visibility can be a real struggle, not only for yourself, but in order to provide the level of transparency that each customer demands. Using Sage Intelligence, Import Logistics solved their visibility problem, increased customer satisfaction, and they were able to start identifying more than $50,000 per month in recoverable billing that could otherwise have been missed. And that is just through simple reporting. It's not doing anything crazy sophisticated. You don't have to use AI or predictive analytics. It's just about increasing visibility by being intentional in your approach to using data.
Yeah, I said next slide, please. Yeah, I think this chart really underscores, you know, just how dramatic this impact is. So as you can see on the chart, as the rate of technological innovation speeds up, the pace at which businesses are created and go out of business is speeding up too. And this is called the creative destruction cycle. So it's pretty amazing, but in 1965, the average tenure of a company on the S&P 500 was 33 years. And by 1990, that had shrunk to 20 years. Now, that is forecasted, if the current churn rate holds, to shrink to just 14 years by 2026. So think about it, building that business, growing that business, have it go out of business. Oh, it's almost exhausting just to just to think about it. And about 50% of today's S&P 500, you know, are likely to get replaced, looking at that churn rate. And, you know, these are just some examples of people that have come and go, but the bottom line is that these established businesses that can't keep up are just going to be pushed out by the more agile companies that disrupt them. So put another way, the fast will eat the slow.
Absolutely. So I really like the story of Newberry Tanks here. So when my friend Chris Long led a group of investors to purchase the company in 2011, their accounting systems were paper-based. They had to be batch entered into a DOS application. Operations were in worse condition. They had spreadsheets, and they were using a lot of paper. Now, a lot of businesses view the status quo as something that works, and they see change as something that introduces inconvenience and risk. A lot of businesses see the status quo as similar to the rock in my front yard that keeps tigers away. As long as I've had that rock in my front yard, I haven't had a tiger problem, but I dare not get rid of that rock because I just have no idea what might happen, right? Or a lot of people sort of are grateful for those processes that got them from A to B, got them to where that they are today, without which they would not have seen the success that they have today, not realizing that that ladder that got them there today is now serving as a barrier. So they don't always think about how their existing processes are actually holding them back. There can be even an element of superstition, tantamount to that rock in my front yard. But sometimes as a business, it's important to acknowledge those processes, be grateful for how they got you to where you are, thank them and kick them away. And Newberry Tanks is a great example of that. So since implementing Sage 100, Newberry Tanks, it's grown its profit to more than twice that of its nearest competitor as a result of adding Sage CRM and Sage Inventory Advisor in the last few years. They've also seen additional incremental growth in revenue at the same time as they've optimized their inventory and cut supply costs. Now the big difference here, right? It's not about the specific technologies. It's about looking very, very carefully at your existing practices, being intentional and identifying which ones are helping you and which ones are actually holding you back, and then developing a strong strategy to implement not just technologies, but other practices to help you overcome those barriers and to see success. So, to switch gears, right? No business is too big or too small to ignore these trends. Lori, what is your research saying about how SMBs are preparing for digital transformation?
Sure. Well, we just wrapped up, as I mentioned earlier, our 2019 SMB digital transformation study. And, looking at the data, we know that SMB decision makers, who are the respondents for our studies, definitely see changes coming. There's overwhelming agreement for all of these statements on here, like using new technology effectively is key to our company's survival and growth, and that technological changes are reshaping workplace, culture, business practices, business models, and entire industries. So there's no doubt that most decision makers understand that the world is changing and they've got to use technology to kind of reshape their businesses to keep up. Next slide, please. And they also we also asked them about the importance of different technology capabilities to their businesses in the future. And interestingly, when we look at this, as Timothy was saying, some people they're definitely interested in things like AI and machine learning and natural language interfaces and all of those kinds of things. But the top thing that really comes out that they absolutely feel they've got to have is analytics, reporting, and dashboarding. And that gets back to having that visibility into the business. So you really not only know what's going on, but you can see how, things in one area affect things in another area, right? And so tied into that, I'm really not surprised that the next most important thing on the list is integration. So, you have different workflows and different processes in your business. If you can connect them and then do the analytics and reporting on top of that, you're obviously going to get a more holistic view of the business than if you have different applications siloed. So I won't read through all the rest of these, but I think it just kind of suffices to say that, there's a healthy degree of interest among SMBs in all of these technologies. And I think over time, we're going to see SMBs adopt more and more of them, not because they're bolting them on to the applications that they use, but because the people that provide, the companies that they get the applications from, are going to build more of these capabilities in. Next slide, please. So what are the drivers for the SMBs? We all hear about all the Amazons of the world, but for SMBs, the top drivers boil down to some very specific things that they need to do to ensure their business remains relevant. So first and foremost, they want to streamline their operations. And that can mean anything from cutting time out of doing things, to cutting costs out, to being able to react more quickly when things change. And especially today with the whole, really tight labor market, improving employee productivity is number two. And I think that's because you have to get more out of the employees you have in a tight job market, because it's not so easy often to hire new ones. And attracting new customers, getting ahead of competitors, responding to customer demands, expectations. And I think reducing costs kind of ties in with the streamlining operations too. I know it looks a little low on the list, but I think a lot of people, when they think about streamlining operations, reducing costs is a big thing. And I think, Timothy, you had a little anecdote to add to this.
More than an anecdote, I have more research.
Oh,
So
great.
recently we did some really interesting research with Forrester to try to understand, the specific drivers, not just in general, but specifically for SMB manufacturers and distributors. And what we found was really interesting. What we found was that for these businesses, of course, revenue growth and cost reduction were top drivers. No surprise. The priors were a little bit different. For manufacturers, we're focused on cutting costs, and distributors were focused on increasing revenue. But for both, those were the top two priorities. But what was surprising was the fact that from the perspective of digital transformation, more than 50% of businesses in these segments felt that hybrid approach, the kind of hybrid approach that consists of a combination of both sort of traditional on-premise technologies and cloud-based features, was the right one for them, and that these businesses were actively planning to invest in hybrid ERP rather than cloud native over the next 5 to 8 years. So the question is, okay, how, if we're just looking at manufacturers and we're looking at distributors, okay, does it mean that the sort of hybrid approach is being adopted by sort of more conservative, less innovative businesses, and sort of top other 50% are sort of more innovative? Well, as it turns out, no. We found that businesses fell into basically 3 categories: continuous improvers, operators who are focused primarily on cost reduction, and innovators who are looking to make some kind of truly transformative change. What we didn't find was that an on-prem approach was the one being adopted by cost reducers, and that a cloud-based approach was being adopted by innovators. Rather, we found that the technology modality, on-prem, hybrid, cloud, what have you, was not actually strongly correlated with the business strategy. Contrary to a lot of the hype that we hear, digital transformation is not something you can buy. Digital transformation is something that you do in response to specific business challenges. It absolutely involves investments in technology, but the most successful businesses are those that carefully select the technologies and complement those technologies with investment in people and processes to most effectively achieve their specific business objectives.
Yeah, and what we also found out was that we've got about half of the, or about a quarter rather, of the SMBs that we surveyed that are currently implementing something that they perceive of as digital transformation in their business. So if you're among that 24%, that quarter, congrats, you're ahead of the curve. But most SMBs are in the early going still. And as you can see, about half of SMBs are thinking about this and trying to plan for it. And about a quarter have no plans underway. And interestingly, the biggest reason for not having any plans underway is they need help. They really don't know what path to take to figure out where they need to go. Money is another obstacle, and just I think this one is the one that scares me most. It's not necessary for our business, because I think it will be necessary for most businesses. So I think the bottom line here on this slide is that if you're in that no activity plans group, or even if you're in currently planning, you should be thinking about who are the advisors you can go to, maybe some of the tech vendors and partners you work with, associations, trade associations, technology councils in your state, that kind of thing. But different venues you can go to kind of explore ideas for the business and then think about how you can use technology to help implement them. Next slide, please. And, this is probably good advice for almost anybody, because even among companies that have digital transformation activities underway, they still see things as being kind of challenging. And I won't read through all the data points here, but only 19% of our respondents said they feel like they have a well-defined strategy for digital transformation. So even when you start out and you start doing things, this is all new ground. And just figuring out what solutions are going to, best help your business is a big challenge. And then getting the IT skills and the support you need, and even carving out the time you need. So my advice would be to take advantage of different organizations and partners that you have out there to help you really think this through. Next slide, please. But regardless of where you are, you really do need to at least get started on this path, because what we see is that SMBs that are already investing in different business initiatives in this realm are definitely outperforming their peers. So on this chart, we see 79% of SMBs that are currently have these digital transformation initiatives underway forecast revenue growth, while about 60 that are planning to invest forecast revenue growth. And only 41% of SMBs that have no plans to invest are forecasting growth. So I think what this says here is just thinking about it and just really seeing, how your business is sizing up, what some of the problem areas may be in the future, is going to help you start, thinking differently, behaving differently, and acting differently in terms of business planning. And if you just keep your head, stuck in the sand, you're probably going to slip further and further behind. Next slide, please. Which, kind of begs the question, how should you get started? Most SMBs, limited resources, limited budget, where can you start? Next slide. So I think, before I get into the tips, I just want to do a quick refresh on this definition we provided, digital transformation up front. Which is basically what do you have to change in your business so you can stay current and relevant, and how can you put technology to work to help you do that and to adapt. So what I'm going to really note here, there is nothing in this definition that says you have to boil the ocean and tackle everything all at once, or even know what all the components of your strategy should be from the get-go. I think the best way to think about digital transformation is a journey you're going to start and take step by step. And you need to start small, learn, make adjustments, and then take the next step. And I can tell you that even very large companies, go about digital transformation in many cases in much this way. They'll pilot something in an area where they know they need to make improvements, see if it works. If it works, they take the next step, and then they tackle the next area. So what are some of the things you can do? Well, first of all, if we go to the next slide, and Timothy alluded to this before, I think the conversation you need to have as a business owner or an executive or a manager is, what is the cost to your business if you don't adapt? I love this quote. It is not necessary to change. So you don't have to change because survival isn't mandatory. So you can ride the, I mean, if your business is a dinosaur, you can ride that dinosaur into the sunset. And for some businesses that are lifestyle businesses that, it's just you and another person, and when you retire, you're done, that may make perfect sense. But if this business is going to be an ongoing concern, you need to take the blinders off. And you need to recognize that your business will be impacted because change is really swirling all around you. So I think having this honest conversation and asking yourself the cost if you don't adapt is key. And chances are, if you're being honest with yourself, you realize the cost will be high. Next slide. And that can be a very tough conversation, of course, because you're going to have different people, with different appetites for change. But if you do, once you get over that hurdle, and it's a big one, what's next? So although we've talked a little bit about technology and how it will fuel a lot of the initiatives you're going to put in place for your business, technology is not where you need to start. Because if you do, you'll just end up probably swimming in a lot of buzzwords and jargon and vendor pitches. And as a lot of people do, as we saw on the other slide, you'll be confused about what's going to really help your business because you're just overwhelmed and overloaded. So instead, I would recommend you just start with like a fresh look. How's the ground changing around my business? What's changing in my business, among competitors, with customers? Is repeat business slipping? Do I see new competitors on the landscape, on the horizon, or taking business away from me? What are they doing differently? Are channels that used to work maybe not working so well anymore? What regulations are changing? But you need to kind of assess where the biggest changes are and where you need to pull some levers so you can stay ahead of the curve. And I think if you do this, that will help you prioritize the areas that are, what's the biggest need, the biggest potential gotcha. And that can kind of define your first initiative. Next slide, please. I also can't stress enough that, change is really hard. So you do need to collaborate and communicate, with everyone, ideally from the get-go of this, to get ideas, to get buy-in, and to create a shared vision for the goals and processes that you're going to need to instate. So collaboration, obviously, within your company, with the decision makers, and don't forget those employees who are going to have to use the technology. Sometimes I think managers, may leave them for last, but I would get them involved early. Obviously from vendors and partners that can give you some good input, peers and associations, as I mentioned. And don't forget your customers. It's pretty easy these days to not only just pick up the phone and ask some of your better customers what they see and what they'd like, but also just do some online surveys. So, and then finally, create the metrics so you can kind of say, okay, this is before and after. What am I measuring? What's the impact? So, for example, if you want to invest in automating your order process system, it's taking too long to process and ship orders. Customers aren't happy with that. So you may want to evaluate how many customers you lose while they're in queue for an order entry. How could different potential solutions like RFID readers or barcode scanners compare in cutting down the time? And how could it possibly help you save time and operate, more efficiently? So I think those are just some, definite tips about how to get people involved and start looking at a specific area. Next
And it's
slide.
really important for us to also to jump on this, because I think this is a really important point. It's important that we talk about digital transformation in the right way, right? Because if we talk about an organization transforming digitally, or an organization going through digital transformation, what you're saying is that the organization is changing. And you know what? Changing is hard, and more importantly, changing is scary. Change is really, really scary. So when we're framing up conversations about digital transformation, it can be far more productive and actually more accurate if we say, as an organization, we are responding to digital transformation. The world has changed, the landscape is changing, customer expectations are changing, and we have to respond. And how are we going to do that? The second really important point is that as an organization, as people within an organization, we often say that our organization people fear change, and that is patently untrue, right? People don't fear change, they fear loss. So when we're having conversations internal to an organization, the sort of critical and crucial conversations that we need to be having with every stakeholder is to understand what is it that a change will represent in terms of the things that our stakeholders are giving up or think that they may be giving up, so that we can mitigate those perceptions and replace those things that they have to give up with new things that are better, that represent a better future. And it's within that context when you're not talking about change, right, for its own sake, you're not talking about loss, you're talking about a better world, and that can really catalyze an organization and motivate them to move forward in a common direction.
Excellent point. Yeah. And, so hopefully, by kind of going through these different, this kind of process, things should start coming into focus for you about the specifics. Where should I put my resources? And, focus on the top one or two things. Don't try to boil the ocean, or you could drown in it. And, consider how, I think when you evaluate this also, in addition to the most kind of pressing thing, consider where and how you can get an early win. I personally would not start with the toughest hurdle. I'd look at kind of where I can have the biggest impact with the lowest risk, because getting that early win can help you galvanize more buy-in, because you're going to be successful. You're going to kind of show that, yes, we can do this, and look at the results, and get people excited to move to the next goal that they want to tackle. Next slide, please. And so finally, after all that, the very last thing is back to technology. So I think we all as businesses always have to be evaluating, especially today, do I have the solutions that I need to help me achieve these goals? And, what's working? Where do I maybe need to swap out some old software or clunky processes with something more modern and integrated, let's say? Something that's going to help the business spend less time on process and redundant kinds of things, and more time on decision making and customer type of activities that really contribute to growing the businesses. Also make sure that you can get the data, the reporting, the analytics you need, so you can make better decisions, and you can see and measure how the changes you're implementing are working. And, iterate and improve, because like I said, it's a journey. And, make sure that you keep trying to fine tune things to make it more effective. And finally, I think just remember that the rate and pace of technology change is only speeding up. So you got to make sure too that the solutions you use are adaptable, and flexible, so that you can add new functionality and capabilities when you need them. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Lori. That was really informative. Before we move into questions, and I do see that we have some, I want to just sort of summarize where we've been. So in the first place, digital transformation, right, is less about what businesses are doing, the things that they're buying, and more about recognizing that the world is transforming as a result of the proliferation of digital technologies, and that businesses need to carefully think about how they respond. Now, this is not to say that a business does not need to invest in digital technologies in order to survive and thrive. That is absolutely the case. But the mistake that so many businesses make is that they can buy their way out of a problem, when actually, actual fact, they need to do very serious thinking about who they are, where they want to be, where their barriers lie, and then be very intentional in the ways in which they're investing in technologies. And it's only with that sort of degree of foresight and intentionality that they will succeed. Second of all, the way that SMBs respond will differ from business to business. There's no magic bullet. There's no secret sauce. And it's also not necessary for businesses to transform all at once. This is not this can be iterative, right? And begin with the low-hanging fruit, so that you can garner momentum, recognizing that culture is as important as your tech stack or your architecture. And then lastly, where should businesses begin? Well, first of all, again, recognize that failure to adapt will have future costs that you may not be experiencing now, but certainly will have in the future. Agility is a virtue in this period of the fourth revolution, and that's agility not just in terms of our ability to respond to market forces and competitive conditions, but also to customer needs. Transformation is as much about changing culture as it is about changing technology. Number 4, focus on specific goals and tackle one at a time. And lastly, begin with the data. Start with information that you have available. Because of the nature of the systems that every business has, they are oftentimes data rich but information poor. Just a little bit of investment into understanding what you have and then focusing that data to solve specific problems can get you a long way. So with that, thank you all for listening. I'd like to invite you to ask questions. There is a question box, I'm told, and I see that a couple of you have in fact added questions. I'd like to begin with this one because it's sort of close to my heart. My wife is a small business owner, and this is a constant struggle for her, I know, to think about, to recognize that there are benefits to be had through investments in process and technology, but there's also risk and concern that that there is an upfront cost involved. So, Lori, digitization is happening really fast and it's costly. How do I keep up with changes in digital technology without going under?
Well, that is a great question. And I think, again, it comes back to focus and prioritizing, right? Again, knowing where the biggest area is for improvement that you need to tackle and applying, there's a lot of solutions today on the market for almost anything you need, which on the one hand can be overwhelming, but on the other hand, it means that not everything is, crazy overpriced. So I think just like anything else, you have to shop around and make a good decision about something that is both affordable as well as going to give you the results you want. I would also say that there's certainly a lot of new financing opportunities out there for businesses, and certainly judicious financing for something that's going to help your business grow makes a lot of sense as well.
So here's another really interesting question. Oftentimes, the needs for transformation, for improvement, or opportunities for improvement are not seen in the C-suite, so to speak, right? They're seen on the shop floor, they're seen on the ground. And here's the question, how do I convince leaders in my company that transformation matters? Particularly, I'm sort of hearing in organizations that are more conservative or resource constrained.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it, goes back to that slide that we had. Change is mandatory. Survival is not. Um, Basically, you have to ask yourself, what is the cost to my business if I don't change? And I think you have to document that. You document where, if you're a manager on, in whatever area, you've got to create some information and data and insights to share with senior management that shows, hey, we're hemorrhaging business because of XYZ, or we're our production times have really slowed because of some other thing, or we're not shipping things fast enough, people are canceling orders. And when you can document the problems clearly, I think it is more of an eye-opener. And again, as you said, Timothy, not couching it so much in terms of we need to digitally transform our business, but we need to change what we're doing so that we're doing it more effectively, and technology plays a role in that.
Now, here's I think a final question, and again one that's close to my heart because I grapple with this as well. The question is, does digital transformation mean I have to move my business to the cloud? And the way that I read this is yes, specifically a question about moving to the cloud, but more broadly, it's a question that speaks to how a business will respond to, let's just call it hype, right? Coming out of analytics, we heard a lot of businesses would say, if I want to improve my business, I need to get some analytics. They wouldn't know exactly what kind of information they were looking for. They would have an unclear view of what their objectives were or what the expected ROI was going to be, but they knew that everybody else was getting analytics, right? Everybody else was getting AI. They needed to get some too. And that's a pressure that I think felt really universally, and a pressure that can be hard as a business is having to make some really difficult choices that have a significant impact to the bottom line. So how does a business navigate that sort of hype relative to, which comes along with a lot of fear, right? I'm a marketer, sorry, but there are, but marketers, to give marketers a bad name, right, are often inclined to use a lot of this sort of fear language that ends up being really palpably felt if it's not already being felt already. So how can a business make the right decisions in the face of hype and fear about what's on the horizon?
Well, I think there, just in general at a very high level, there are advantages and disadvantages to cloud, to on-prem, and to a hybrid deployment model. So there is no one silver bullet or one size fits all for everyone. What I think you have to look at first is, again, what am I trying to do with the business? What are the solutions that are going to provide me with the capabilities that I need today, and a vendor that is going to be investing in the product going forward to make sure I have some of the new capabilities I may need tomorrow. What might I need to run on premise due to either regulatory concerns, latency issues, whatever those things are? What can I manage in-house versus what maybe I don't have the resources to manage? So there isn't one answer, but I think for any company, the place to start is this solution going to give me the capabilities I need and the growing room I need? Because as we have said a bazillion times today, things are only going to keep changing. And even if let's say your ERP is on-prem, you want the ability maybe to hook into some other things in the cloud and have them integrate. So you really need to look at it I think not just either or cloud on-prem, but kind of weigh the variables in terms of your own organization's requirements and also your constraints.
Yeah, and I think Sage as a business is in this really fortunate position of being able to have this kind of conversation by virtue of the depth and breadth of our portfolio. Unlike businesses that maybe have a single offering, who have to say, if you don't have this kind of product, if you don't have a cloud-based product, if you don't have this kind of product, you're going to be in trouble. Because Sage has sort of every sort of modality covered, we're actually able to have that more, and it's a luxury, but we're able to have that more nuanced conversation about not just what is the best technology, right, which is a pretty blunt conversation to have, but what is the right technology for you, and more importantly, what is the right technology for you here and now, and into the future. And so through research that we're doing with Forrester, through conversations that we're having with people like you, Lori, I'm really excited to have more of these, again, more nuanced conversations about the right fit and how we work together to navigate the uncertain future that has been marked by digital transformation. So thank you, Lori, for joining us today. Thank you so much to all of you for joining. Thank you for the great questions. Please do join us next time for our next webinar. We have a series of about 5 or 6 of these already on deck. And we're really excited to explore these in more detail. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk to you again soon.